Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this week's contemplation. So these episodes are ones where I share some of my contemplations for the astrology of the week ahead as well as the energy of the week ahead. And these are some of the questions, some of the musings that I am thinking for myself. And so as always, I welcome you to feel into your own truth, what is coming up for you as you're listening to this, any intuition, any sensation that you are feeling is probably more important than whatever it is that I'm saying. And also, I would recommend that if you listen to this and you found this episode outside of the week that I'm discussing here with regards to the astrology, consider that perhaps there's some message here that you are needing. So, all right, let's get to it. As always, we begin with a little bit of an overview of the week ahead. So we have a pretty quiet first half of the week. And then on Thursday, March 2nd, Venus in Aries will conjoin Jupiter in Aries. And on the same day, Mercury in Aquarius will be conjoin Saturn in Aquarius too. And later that day, Mercury will be entering Pisces. So Thursday is a pretty big day. Friday, March 3rd, Venus in Aries will make a conjunction with the dwarf planet, I guess, or some people even call it asteroid, Chiron. Saturday, March 5th, Mercury in Pisces will be sextiling North Node in Taurus and trining the South Node in Scorpio. And I should also mention that this is the last week where Saturn is going to be in Aquarius. So let's get right into our contemplations. The first question that I will be sharing for you to contemplate on is, where might directness be my most compassionate strategy? Where might honesty be the most effective salve? So I think it's interesting, right? Considering that the two benefics, Jupiter and Venus, conjoin one another this week, and it will be answering to and in the home realm of Mars, right? Which is a malefic. And another important aspect is that Mercury and Saturn are also going to be meeting up in Saturn's realm in Aquarius, right? So the two astrological landscapes that are highlighted that receive the spotlight this week are both ruled by the malefics, which is interesting. The question here is, where might your genuine passion and excitement maybe be misinterpreted by others, right? What will it take for you to increase your capacity for being misunderstood? How might this increased capacity assist you in composting your judgments, projections, assumptions, and transmute them into deep connection and trust, right? When benefics, which are Jupiter and Venus, right, when they are in the realm of the malefics, Saturn and Mars, there's a certain level of discomfort. So astrologically, Jupiter is neutral in Aries, right? But when it's in Aries, it's in a square to Jupiter's place of exaltation, which is in Cancer. Jupiter and Mars also fall in different sects, right? Jupiter belongs to the day sect, Mars belongs to the night sect. Meanwhile, Venus is just straight up in detriment in Aries, right? So it's stranded, so to speak, in a land that is opposite of its home, one of which is Libra, right? So when I think about Venus and Jupiter being in Aries, what came up for me are characters like in movies and stories who kind of walk the line between being trustworthy and being untrustworthy within a particular narrative arc, right? Maybe this can look like someone who appears like a villain but turns out to be ultimately actually a good character or an ally to the main character. Maybe I'm thinking about someone like Professor Snape in Harry Potter. Or maybe someone who is good but somehow got caught up in doing dodgy things because they had to, right? Because of circumstances. Like, I'm thinking about someone like Ruth Langmore in the TV show Ozark, which, by the way, as far as TV shows go, I feel like Ozark is actually a really good show to check out if you're wanting to feel the vibe of Venus and Jupiter being in Aries, because the whole show is so morally ambiguous, right? There's literally no hero in the show. Like, everyone's kind of corrupt, and everyone's kind of a victim of their circumstances, and they kind of had to make do with choices that are less than optimal, maybe for them. So hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture for the energy of this coming week, right? My real point here is that this is an interesting week. You might find yourself questioning your own idea about like what is good versus what is bad, right? You may find yourself in situations where maybe you're given the option of doing something that you know is beneficial for yourself or for all involved, right? Or speaking up in a way that is beneficial for all involved. But that may require you to let go of, at least momentarily, this idea of like yourself as a quote unquote nice person, right? It requires a lot of strength. It requires a lot of fortitude to move through situations like these because it moves us outside of our comfort zone. It makes sense, right, for us to be afraid of taking up space. After all, we live in a society where there's just so much evidence of abuses of power, right? Where there's so much collective trauma and injustice, and where so many people feel this pinch on their sense of agency, right? It can be really difficult to decide when it's appropriate to take that Martian swing of the blade, right? Like when I'm thinking about Mars, I'm thinking about like that samurai blade, or like someone who practices martial arts and like delivers the punch, right? In a very efficient, effective way. It can be very difficult to enact the Saturnian boundaries, right? Especially when we can premeditate or maybe pre-sense the impact that our boundaries may have on another person, or that our decisiveness, right, our action can have on another person. So when we are faced with situations like this, situations that are less than ideal, where maybe we have to speak up or maybe we have to get into some sort of confrontation in order to get to the other side, consider the possibility that maybe it's not actually that hard, right, inherently. That perhaps it's only hard because you're used to being nice, or you're used to keeping the peace. You're used to playing the role of the healer, right? Perhaps the impact of your directness, of your honesty, will be as painful as you imagined for the other person. Or perhaps it will just land quite differently than you had imagined, and it might lead you into a plot twist that you never had thought of, right? I also want to direct our attention to Aries and to Aquarius to sense into the wisdom that they may have for us here, right? So Aries and Aquarius form a sextile to one another, which means, to me at least, that they may not look like the most obvious match. Like when I think about planets, or rather signs that are sextiling one another, what I'm really thinking about is that, these signs are not in opposition to one another. Like they're not kind of fighting with one another. There's no tension between them, but that chemistry may require a little bit of prodding, right? They need proper introductions to one another so that the two can really start talking to one another and then what may blossom forth from the space of them kind of talking to one another is that a collaboration may come forth, right? And it may be really interesting to see that dynamic, because one may complement what the other doesn't necessarily have, or what the other is lacking. So Aries, ruled by Mars, is associated with decisiveness, with directness, with single-mindedness, conviction married with speed, right? It's cardinal fire. So it's the friction that starts the fire. Like, I'm really thinking about, for example, lighting a match, right? Like, friction is needed in order for a match to be lit. Aquarius, ruled by Saturn, on the other hand, is associated with perspectives that are a bit more zoomed out, right? Strategies and strategizing ways that are innovative, right? That are outside of the box, that understands what the rules are and then consciously breaks them, right? Aquarius is associated with understanding the meta patterns, the underlying social structure of reality, right? It's fixed air. So it's kind of like, I think about Aquarius as air that's being condensed in like a tank, right? Like an oxygen tank. It's solid, it's ready to be used in places where maybe there's not air, or there's not where if you are going scuba diving, for example, you need that oxygen tank, right? If you are going out to space, I don't know, I've never done this one, but I imagine you need an oxygen tank, right, to be out in that vacuum of space. But it does need to be funneled, because it's put in like a certain structure, right? And there's kind of a fixedness to it, And so both malefics, Mars and Saturn, are really here to protect, among other functions, right? When we think about Mars and Saturn and their most expansive, most virtuous goal, to me, it is to protect, right? To protect the tender parts of our moon, to protect the ideals of our Venus, to protect the generosity of our Jupiter, to protect the radiance of our sun, right? With Aries and Aquarius, what comes to mind again is that there are moments where our honesty, our directness, our boundaries are really our best strategies. What if you let yourself practice being honest with yourself and with others? What do you need in order to facilitate your honesty? In other words, how can you resource yourself to let your honesty flow through you, right? And I think it's important to think about the idea of what true honesty is, right? What real honesty is. To me, true honesty is connected to a sense of groundedness. True honesty is connected to a sense of being rooted in our own personal truth at that moment. It's very different than being reactive, right? Being reactive comes with really extreme ups and downs. Usually it feels like being on an emotional roller coaster, right? Like wanting to say something just to have a particular impact. One way, I think, to be quite discerning is to feel into what are our tendencies 70% of the time, right? Do you know yourself to be someone who's pretty hot-headed and pretty quick to react without centering on that sense of embodied truth first and foremost, right? Without finding that place in your gut or in your belly or in your feet before you speak up? Or are you the kind of person who tends to just swallow, to set aside, to maybe deny, to obscure your feelings in order to feel belonging, in order to avoid conflict, right? If you're the former, if you're hot-headed, then you don't need more Aries here. My recommendation would be for you to find your roots when you're activated, right? To find that Aquarian part of you, to feel into what is the most expansive yet grounded way that I want to deal with the situation, right? Take the time to really feel into that internal clarity first. Get to that place of, when you're thinking about Aquarius, in the northern hemisphere, right? Aquarius is the height of winter. So there's something about Aquarius that is really quite cool-headed, you know? Whereas if you are the latter, if you tend to really run cold, if you are slow and calculated and maybe even a little bit conflict avoidant, then my recommendation is for you to let loose a little bit with this practice, right? It's a practice that requires sensibility and requires judgment. So let me share a little bit of an anecdote about honesty, especially if you belong to the second camp and you are, maybe struggling to really access that sense of being direct and honest, especially when you already internally feel your truth, but you feel a resistance towards sharing that outwards, right? A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with someone I dearly love where I had to be really honest about how I felt about the relationship. This was really difficult for me because for a very long time, I was worried that my honesty will hurt this person. But during the conversation, what became really clear to me is that actually, me not having been direct and having been honest ended up hurting this person more. What became clear to me was that the energetics, right, of our tension, the energetics of what separates us from a clear, honest, true version of really loving one another, they're present anyhow. Regardless of whether I was honest and direct about, what it is about their actions and attitudes and perspectives that hurt me specifically, right, and that distorted the relationship, those energetics are present anyway, right? Me not being direct and honest actually created this field of projection. It created this energetic wall, right, full of assumptions, misinformations, confusions, and that actually perpetuated the shame and the sadness and the ickiness even more, right? Here I was thinking that I was softening the blow by never being direct, right? When actually all this weird stuff ended up growing in the metaphorical garden, in the metaphorical aquarium between the two of us in the relationship, right? And you know what's weird? Once I was able to be really clear and honest, not only did I feel a lot better than I had ever felt for a long time in this relationship, but I think this person actually also felt better. Although I'm not sure if it was easy for them to hear what I had to say. And what I experienced was that our relationship suddenly had this really clear path of communication, right? Where suddenly it was like, thinking about the analogy of like the fish in the aquarium, and maybe this is a little gross, is like the fish in the aquarium is still gonna poop, right? But at least the water has been filtered and now it's clean, and you can see the fish. You can see what's going on. If one of the fish is like hurt or something, you can kind of see it, right? So yeah, maybe that's a bit of a strange metaphor. Okay, so the other point of contemplation that I will suggest relates to the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, this is really the last week of Saturn being in Aquarius, which is a sign that it rules. And next week, we will talk more about Saturn in Pisces. But if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I've been talking about, for quite a bit for the past few months, the significance of Saturn entering Pisces, because it will be the first time in 6 years that Saturn is in a sign that it doesn't rule, right? So my suggestion for you is to think about the past 6 years and to think about everything that you've learned from Saturn being in the signs that she rules, right? You can Google these dates, but I'm also going to give it to you. Saturn entered Capricorn on December 19th, 2017. And then essentially around March 2020, it started dipping in and out of Aquarius. So like between Capricorn and Aquarius. And then it solidly entered Aquarius on December 17, 2020. So you can think about that period of 2017 to 2020 where Saturn is largely in Capricorn, right? And then 2020 to now, is that period where Saturn is in Aquarius. So my questions for you is, what have you learned about Saturn, right? What have you learned about limits? What have you learned about time, both the passage of time, which is linear for us human beings living in flesh, right? In like bones and meats and blood, but also time as that entity, that being that is spiralic, that is undefinable, that is non-linear and relative. What have you learned about what's real and what's not real in your construction of reality and the construction of the realities that you've inherited, whether that's with or without your consent? What have you learned about your foundations, especially against this backdrop of societal foundations, right? Really shifting in very major ways. What have you learned about your ancestors, both the human and the non-human ancestors, those who have come before you, those who have paved the way for you and for your being? What have you learned about the idea of legacy? Your own legacy or your community's legacy, right? What is it that you are here to leave behind? What have you learned about navigating the space or the border between one world and another, one project and another, one relationship and another? What has taught you about the nature of creating delineations in places where perhaps there's only liminality before, right? I know that's a lot, but if some of these inquiries are interesting to you, I welcome you to listen to that part again. I just gave you a very rich set of contemplative questions or contemplation points, I suppose. But I also want to recommend a really solid and incredible offering. If you want to deepen into these inquiries, is Diana Rose Harper's Saturn offering, which is Our Lady of Time. Some of you may know that Diana is one of my mentors. She's been a guest on the podcast, and I've really been enjoying this offering. It's assisted me with some really rich explorations, and so I recommend you check it out if you feel called to working more deeply with Saturn, and I will have the link below. And I'm not an affiliate or anything. I just really love Diana's work. So thinking about this liminal space, right, between Saturn being in spaces that they rule, going into the space where Saturn is, entering the realm of Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter, is this question of, what do you perceive to be the difference between surrendering, letting go, and giving up? So the word that came up for me when I was feeling into Saturn's last few miles in Aquarius, so to speak, is actually exhaustion. Saturn in astrology is often considered a dry planet, right? The terrains ruled by Saturn, Capricorn and Aquarius, has a certain dryness to them, right? Has a certain sobriety to them. In my days as a classical musician, we used to really hate having to play in concert halls that are dry, that don't have a lot of reverb, right? When there's reverb, there's this glow, there's this warmth to the sounds of our instruments, right? Which makes us able to kind of relax more into the field of sounds that we're creating, right? Spaces with a little bit more reverb has this more forgiving, more gentle, more welcoming aura to them. Whereas dry concert halls can feel really unforgiving and critical and harsh, right? Even in my body now, I can kind of remember the tension that I felt when I had to perform in concert halls that are really dry, right? However, what I think is interesting is that the opposite is true when it comes to thinking about my ideal practice room. So, we had this, I don't know, at least the conservatory that I went to had this opposite problem, right? Where like some of the concert halls are a little too dry, and then some of the practice rooms are a little too wet or has too much reverb, right? And this is actually really horrible for classical musicians because we need to be able to hear accurately what we are playing, right? And so when you are practicing, you want an environment that's a little bit more dry so that you can hear, the quality of the sound that you're making and not just, all the sounds like basically pinging from wall to wall, right? And not, getting kind of caught up in this illusion of how amazing your playing is to only then play in a concert hall that's a little bit more dry and then realizing, oh, actually, I'm not as great as I thought I was. So this is what I think, this is how I'm kind of visualizing Saturn entering Pisces after having been in Capricorn and Aquarius, right? Because there's a sense of Saturn having been practicing in like that dry practice room, right? Having like really learned lessons, like squeezed out of really tough times, cultivated these fortitude, right? And fastidiousness and consistency that now Saturn can just start swimming, in the sea of Pisces and start to really enjoy the warmth and the holding and the playfulness that Jupiter can provide, right? And in the last few stretches here, to me, the energetics of Saturn for this coming week really feels like the word that's coming up for me is exhaustion, right? The word exhaustion came from the Latin exhaustus, which by the way is terrible pronunciation. Sorry, not a Latin scholar. And it essentially means to draw off, right? To drain, to use up, to empty. There's a sort of emptiness, ennui maybe, to Saturn having traversed her own land for some time, right? It's like, I'm so tired of like hearing my own flaws. I'm so tired of being in these practice rooms where I can hear every single wrong note, where I can hear every single way in which I don't live up to my own quote unquote standards, right? And so as Saturn is getting ready to let go of control to enter the realm of Pisces, the realm of Jupiter, there's this question of what is ripe for us to surrender? What do we want to let go of? What do we want to give up altogether, right? And to me, the energetics of these three are quite different. Surrendering and letting go and giving up, to me, are not the same, right? And I welcome you to feel into your own knowing about this. How are they different for you specifically? For me, giving up has this energy of like resignation, right? Maybe this is something you've been trying for a really long time and it's kind of really taken a toll on your body and on your being, and you're just done with it. It's feeling that sting of death, right? Letting go is about releasing control from our hands, releasing control from, realizing that you have basically come to the edges, right, of what it is that you can control. And to me, letting go has more of an energy of just like, okay, I'm going to release this, right? Surrendering is something else altogether for me. Surrendering can include letting go, but letting go doesn't necessarily include surrendering, at least for me. Because surrendering to me is about kind of passing off the baton, right, to some other power. Maybe it's a spiritual power, but it can also be, passing it off to the collective or your community, right? Or the algorithm, I don't know, like something, right, that is outside of you. And so to me, surrendering and letting go are quite interconnected, but they may not have anything to do with giving up, right? But giving up is necessarily either a letting go or a surrendering or both, right? All right, that is it by way of contemplation for this coming week. I hope that has been helpful, and I hope that there's something there that sparks something within you that assists you for the coming week. So, a few announcements. I am available for readings in case you are seeking one-on-one support. I really only have 2 spots for live astrology readings in March. They are both, I think, on the 2nd or so week of March. And if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me. I also have a few more spots for 60-minute Akashic readings, and I am deciding to experiment with a new offering. So because my availability for live readings are quite limited in March, I've decided that for March and maybe April, I'm going to share some recorded readings. So if the idea of receiving a recording that's about 45 to 60 minutes of me talking about you, your chart, whatever it is that you're bringing to me through the booking form sounds exciting to you, that is going to be available. And the feel, the texture, the approach, I think will be quite similar to these contemplations. So if you are enjoying these contemplations so far, consider that as an option. Something I should say too is that if you are someone who is quite independent and you like to work through readings at your own time, at your own pace, and you're not really seeking that, kind of human in front of you support, then this may be really good for you. So my introverted friends out there, I'm looking at you. Okay, so feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. One last thing that I should mention about the recorded readings is that there will be a turnaround time of about 3 weeks after you complete your order. So you'll receive your recording within 3 weeks as of this recording. And so the updated information, including if that lead time or turnaround time will expand or get a little bit longer, depending on how many requests I receive, will be reflected on the website. But yeah, as of now, that's the most updated information. I look forward to seeing some of you in reading spaces if that's calling to you. If you have been enjoying this podcast, if you've been enjoying this episode, I know that every podcaster says this, but I would really love it if you could leave a review for the podcast. It always really helps. And these reviews don't have to be long. They literally can be 4 or 5 sentences, and they will take you less than 10 minutes, I bet. So, really appreciating any support you can send the podcast way, sharing these episodes, and whatever feels good to you and whatever feels resonant. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. I hope that your coming week will be full of clarity, full of ease, full of peace, and perhaps most importantly, full of compassion for yourself, for the world around you, for your path, however your path looks like this week, and whatever your path may bring you to. All right, I'm sending you so much love, and I look forward to the next time we gather again. Thank you so much.